Last year, I stumbled on something that made me stop scrolling instantly. It was an illustrated comic explaining how vaccines work. I mean, simple drawings, clear dialogue, easy to follow. And I thought, wait, why aren't we using this format in journalism? Then I forgot about it. Life happened, deadlines piled up. The idea just sat at the back of my mind. Until this year, when I decided to actually try it, my organization did a podcast series on how climate change is affecting crop loss and farmers in Kenya. We interviewed farmers, their stories were great, but I wanted to reach people who don't listen to podcasts. So I took one farmer story and turned it into an illustrated comic. I'll put it on the screen so you can see it. So here's the good news. You don't need to be an illustrator. You don't need expensive software. In fact, you are using this tool, but you don't know it can create an illustrated comic. Let me show you. Before I show you, let me tell you why illustrated comics work so well for journalism, especially for explanations. One, they simplify complexity visually. Two, they are incredibly shareable. Three, they reach different audiences. Four, they work across platforms. I'm going to use one of my published articles as an example. You can follow along with any story you've written. The goal is to turn the key points of your article into an illustrated comic that explains the story clearly and visually. Here's how I did it. So yes, the tool I'm using is ChatGPT. I'm very sure you're shocked to hear that. So what I've done now is I've copied the full text of the article I want to use to produce, and I want it to just focus on one particular person's story. So I would copy, I'm pasting the text, and I'll tell it, look through the stories of the women farmers in this report and tell me the story. Tell me whose story, let me put it this way, whose story is more compelling and has a beginning and an end. So I want to try as much as possible to just narrow it down to one person's story. So I would just focus on that. You can, if you want to create more, you can as well prompt it either ways, whichever prompt you want to use, whichever way you want to produce your comic. But I would just want to focus on one particular women farmers or female farmers story so that you can immediately see what ChatGPT can do. So he just told me that the most compelling story is that of Victoria Alkali. Her story works best structurally and emotionally. Her story, her husband is killed and her house burned during a farmer header clash. This is a sharp opening shock. We immediately know. So the middle is she flees with her children, and the end is she adapts successfully. Yields increase from 10 to 15 bags, but the ending is bittersweet. The rains stop early. The harvest is poor, and the abandoned house. She abandons house construction. The story closes the loop. Survivor, no triumph. That's the valid ending in journalism. All right, so we have narrowed down to Victoria. So the next thing we want to do is I want to create an illustrated comic explainer on Victoria's story. I want you to create a text panel by panel on how her story played out. Include quotes where necessary and maintain the
quote verbatim. Use simple sentences. The panels should only be 8. So you can tweak it depending on how you want yours to be. So I'll give it this prompt. So what we need to do is the comic illustrations are visualized into panels. So it is advisable to create a text for each panel. So sometimes you can have 2 panels in an illustrated comic. You can have 12 in an illustrated comic. Let me show you an example. This is an example of a 2-panel illustrated comic. This is also an example of a 2-panel illustrated comic. This is an example of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-panel illustrated comic. So depending on what you want, you can then recreate. Now it has given me panel 1 before the night, Akali, blah blah blah. It also gives the visual cue. Panel 2, one night, violence broke out. Panel, the visual cue, Victoria holding her children. And then panel 3, panel 4, panel 5, panel 6. So let's just work first on panel 1 to 4. So I'll tell it, create the illustrated comic for comic explainer for panel 1 to 4. Note that Alkali Victoria, so we need to indicate that she's a Nigerian woman. She is a Nigerian woman in her 50s, I think. I'm not sure now, but let's just say in her 50s. Her children are also black, so that it represents her skin complexion accurately. The situation occurred in north central Nigeria. Reflects this visually. Also note that her face and physique and clothing should be consistent all through. Alright, so now we've given it a prompt to go ahead to create panel 1 to 4, and let's give it the work to do. So it will start creating the image. I'll be back when it's done. It gave us 2 options and asked me to pick one. This is the first option. I really love this, but there are not enough text to help people understand what the story is about. This is the second option. I would have to take this because this has a lot of text that people can easily understand. But I love the color vibrancy in this. So we're going to go with the second one. So I continued and said, create the illustrated comic explainer for panel 5 to 8. Please note before I move on to the other one is that it did not give us quotes. It had indicated to give quotes so that we can at least hear exactly from the woman, but it didn't do that. So once you notice in your panel text that it did do that, you reprompt it to do that exactly, and so that you get like a box of the woman speaking and saying something verbatim. So, but for illustration purpose, let's just move ahead. So I told it to illustrate the comic explainer for panel 5 to 8 and maintain character consistency. So I would assume that it changed her clothes, but just maintained her as this woman here. So this is going to be, so this is what it says. In May 2020, she planted again when the rain started, but the rain stopped in August, not November. She started building the new house. She had started, her plans had to wait. A hard decision as a result of the rain. So she said trying something new to improve her farm productivity, chicken droppings, as you can see she's holding. The fertilizer helped, but climate change and cattle grazing remained. Victoria kept farming, doing what she could to survive. So this is it. So pretty much anybody who sees this already understands what the story is about. But again, if the panel text doesn't really reflect what you want, you can prompt ChatGPT to give you a better panel text, or you can even just write it out yourself and then prompt it to do exactly what you want it to do. But this is what ChatGPT can do, and you don't have to master any form of illustration to be able to produce this in seconds or in few minutes. Let me say in few minutes.
One thing before we wrap up, AI should never be the final editor of an illustrated explainer comic. You still need to verify facts, review tone and framing, make sure the visuals don't oversimplify or mislead, especially with topics like climate change or health. Clarity must never replace accuracy. Edit the output thoroughly. Now, I want you to take a story you've done in any format and turn it into an illustrated comic. I want to see the outcome, so please tag me. If this video gave you ideas, please like it and also share it with a colleague. See you in the next video.